I never thought my marriage would become a game, but I could tell something wasn't right when I sat across from Mia at our romantic dinner and watched her swirl the wine in her glass. Something inscrutable, something calculating, flickered in her gaze. "Jake," she exclaimed, placing her glass down and clinking it purposefully. "I've been thinking. It was never a good beginning." "Yeah?" I asked in a steady tone. She took a deep breath, as if she was gathering the courage to say something she knew I wouldn't like. "We've been together for 10 years, and I love you, I do, but don't you feel like— I don't know, maybe we've gotten a little stale?" I blinked. "Stale?" She hurried to clarify, touching my hand across the table. "Not in a bad way," she said. It was kind and well known, but I sensed something unfamiliar. Guilt? Thrills? "I just mean we've settled into a routine. Our routine now consists of work, dinner, and sleep. We hardly even have sex anymore, Jake. And when we do, it's the same every time." I started to disagree, but she wasn't incorrect. Life had become routine.cozy. But when did comfort become a bad thing? I squinted. "What exactly are you saying?" Before responding, Mia took another sip of wine and spoke in a measured, cautious tone. "I want us to try an open marriage." The words hit me like a slap. I drew my hand away and jerked back. "You're joking." "I'm serious." "No, Mia, what the hell?" I spoke sharply now, the shock fading and giving way to something more repulsive. "You want to screw other people?" She became agitated. "That's not what I said." "That's exactly what you said." As if I were the one being irrational, her expression contorted in annoyance. "Jake, I don't want to leave you. I just think a little freedom could bring something fresh into our relationship. Spice things up." I tried to process this by running a hand down my face. Although I had heard of others doing this, Mia had never even made any mention of it. What on earth was the source of this? I said softly, "Is there someone else?" "No," she answered too rapidly. "Of course not. I just think we should have the option. No sneaking, no lies, just honesty, transparency." I closely examined her, looking for weaknesses in her beliefs. "And you think this would help us?" She gave an enthusiastic nod. "We'd set rules and boundaries. It wouldn't change how much I love you." It nearly made me chuckle. Why wouldn't it? With my mind spinning, I gritted my teeth. "So what? You just want to go out and start sleeping with random guys?" The part she hadn't yet stated, that tiny spark of doubt, appeared as her lips pressed together. "No," she said. "I mean, not random guys. But I think I'd have an easier time than you would." And there it was. It wasn't merely a recommendation. It was difficult. Mia was aware of her beauty and self-assurance. She thought that as soon as she became accessible, men would be lining up at her feet. And me? All I had was her dependable, secure spouse. She expected me to suffer and stay at home while she experimented with her newfound independence. I reclined in my seat, feeling sated. "So you want to sleep around and you expect me to just— what? Wait for you to come home?" She laughed. "You could do it too, Jake. If you can." I heard that final part clearly, even if it wasn't said directly. "Try to do it." A chill took hold of my gut. She had already made her decision. I remained silent for a long time, allowing the quiet to grow between us. I wanted to blow up and tell her that she was crazy. Instead, I made myself maintain my composure. When I eventually said, "All right," my voice was uncannily flat. "Let's do it." Mia's eyes slightly enlarged. She didn't think I would agree so quickly. "Wait, really?" I gave a nod. "Really?" I noticed a hint of doubt appear on her face for the first time. Perhaps she expected me to put up more of a fight. Perhaps she wanted me to implore her not to do it. However, I refused to beg. I was determined to ensure Mia would lose if she decided to play this game. We attended a family get-together at Mia's parents' place that evening. Wine and laughter were abundant, and for a short while I forgot about the talk with Mia. Mia's younger sister Sophie appeared in the kitchen behind me. "So," she whispered, with a hint of knowledge in her voice, "I heard about your little agreement." Startled, I turned to face her. "What?" She tucked a lock of her dark hair behind her ear and grinned. Mia wasn't exactly silent about the situation. When she believed I wasn't paying attention, she notified Mom. I shook my head and let out a breath. Yeah. You really agreed to this, didn't you?" Sophie leaned against the counter, observing me. I played it casual and remarked, "Didn't seem like I had much of a choice." Something inquisitive and unreadable flickered in Sophie's eyes. And how will you respond to it? I gave a shrug. I guess I'll just have to wait and see. She simply stared at me for a minute, a slow, almost pleased smile curling her lips. You know, Mia always did underestimate you, she added softly. Then, suddenly, something changed. Perhaps Mia was mistaken about how this game would turn out. Mia did not waste time. She got up early the following morning, wearing a fitted workout shirt with just enough cleavage to stand out in tight black leggings. As I sipped my coffee at the kitchen table, I observed her humming to herself as she browsed through her phone. I remarked nonchalantly, "You seem to be in a good mood." She grinned as she looked up, but there was a smugness about her smile. "Indeed, I have a busy day ahead of me." "Like what?" After a brief moment of hesitation, she shrugged. "Just running errands." I refrained from pressing. I was aware of her true intentions. She was presumably updating dating apps, looking for compliments, and setting up a date as part of her little experiment. She hoped this would be simple. I also had a desire to see her fail. I didn't want to become involved with another woman immediately, not just yet, anyway. However, I wasn't going to let her think that I would lose this game. I was too arrogant for that. She picked up her keys and went to the door, while I picked up my phone from the counter. With a deliberately neutral expression, she turned back. "How are you spending your day?" I grinned. "I think I'll just wait and see." The words were purposeful. I wanted her to have the slightest uncertainty, to ponder, to ask questions. She nodded, her lips pressed together. "All right. Well, enjoy yourself." After that, she vanished. I took another drink of coffee and reclined in my chair, feeling in control for the first time in a long time. Mia spent the first few days hooked to her phone. I saw her chewing her lip like a teenage girl, flirting with her crush, while repeatedly grinning at her screen. However, she remained cautious, no overt names, no questionable actions. However, I could see the joy and excitement of the quest. She felt confident that she was in control. Sophie came next. A few additional texts here and there was how it began. "Hey Jake, is it possible for you to assist me with moving some furniture this weekend? You'll enjoy this new whiskey I saw. I'm sending you a picture. Isn't Mia insane?" Late at night, that final one was sent. I initially convinced myself that she was merely being kind. Compared to Mia's other relatives, Sophie had always been kinder to me. However, Sophie's subtle and gradual attention, which seemed almost premeditated, set her apart from other relatives. Furthermore, I couldn't deny that I like it. Mia was 5 years older than Sophie. Sophie was more relaxed and effortless in her demeanor, whereas Mia had always been refined and rather high maintenance. Despite her seeming lack of concern, her long, dark hair usually flowed elegantly over her shoulders. When she stared at you, she had a way of making you feel like the only person in the room. That last text she sent was, "Mia's crazy, huh?" I paused before answering. Finally, I replied, "You have no idea." The dots showed up right away. "Oh, I believe I do." Something in my chest twisted as I gazed at my phone for a while. This was risky. Wasn't that the idea, though? Mia, meantime, was having trouble. She believed that dating would be as easy as choosing from a sea of men who wanted to worship her by swiping right. Reality, however, wasn't so forgiving. She made a casual remark at supper one evening, hoping for a response. She scrolled through her phone and remarked, "Guys are so weird these days. Although I do match with some males, most of them are merely looking to hook up. Absolutely no effort." I sipped my beer slowly. "Astonishing," she looked at me. "You haven't tried yet, have you?" "Not really," Mia grinned, I assumed. "You're not the kind to dive right into anything like this." That same presumption that I would wait here while she enjoyed herself was back. I rested my elbows on the table and leaned forward. "I'm not sure, Mia. I could surprise you." Her smile wavered slightly. Sophie texted me once more a couple of nights later. "What are you doing?" I was browsing Netflix while sipping a beer on the couch. Hours prior, Mia had departed for what she said were cocktails with a friend. "Not much," I answered. "Why? Do you want to get a drink?" My stomach grew constricted. It was not a beneficial idea. I ought to have declined. I typed back instead, "Where?" After 10 minutes, I got into my car and headed out of town to a little tavern. When I got there, Sophie was already there. A half-empty cocktail glass was in front of her as she sat in a corner booth, with her hair done up in a loose ponytail. A smile came over her face when she spotted me, but it was mocking and playful. I moved to the seat on the other side of her. "What is this about, then?" She gave a shrug. "My favorite brother-in-law was the only one I wanted to spend time with." I chuckled. "Your only brother-in-law is me." "Exactly." She watched me over the rim of her glass as she sipped her drink. "How is it going, then?" I understood her meaning. I let out a breath and combed my hair. "Mia is having a good time." "Yes." Sophie's head cocked. "And you?" I paused. Then I replied, "I think I like having options," which was the one thing I knew would change the dynamic between us. Something flared in Sophie's eyes, and her lips slightly parted. For a brief moment, she bore no resemblance to Mia's younger sister. She had a feminine appearance. "All right," she whispered. Between us, there was a dense silence that was filled with unspoken words. This was risky. I also didn't give a damn. Mia, meantime, was having trouble. She believed that dating would be as easy as choosing from a sea of men who wanted to worship her by swiping right. Reality, however, wasn't so forgiving. She made a casual remark at supper one evening, hoping for a response. She scrolled through her phone and remarked, "Guys are so weird these days. Although I do match with some males, most of them are merely looking to hook up. Absolutely no effort." I sipped my beer slowly. Astonishing, she looked at me. "You haven't tried yet, have you?" "Not really." Mia grinned. I assumed, "You're not the kind to dive right into anything like this." That same presumption that I would wait here while she enjoyed herself was back. I rested my elbows on the table and leaned forward. "I'm not sure, Mia. I could surprise you." Her smile wavered slightly. Sophie texted me once more a couple of nights later. "What are you doing?" I was browsing Netflix while sipping a beer on the couch. Hours prior, Mia had departed for what she said were cocktails with a friend. "Not much," I answered. "Why? Do you want to get a drink?" My stomach grew constricted. It was not a beneficial idea. I ought to have declined. I typed back instead, "Where?" After 10 minutes, I got into my car and headed out of town to a little tavern. When I got there, Sophie was already there. A half-empty cocktail glass was in front of her as she sat in a corner booth, with her hair done up in a loose ponytail. A smile came over her face when she spotted me, but it was mocking and playful. I moved to the seat on the other side of her. "What is this about, then?" She gave a shrug. "My favorite brother-in-law was the only one I wanted to spend time with." I chuckled. "Your only brother-in-law is me." "Exactly." She watched me over the rim of her glass as she sipped her drink. "How's it going, then?" I understood her meaning. I let out a breath and combed my hair. "Mia is having a good time." "Yes." Sophie's head cocked. "And you?" I paused. Then I replied, "I think I like having options," which was the one thing I knew would change the dynamic between us. Something flared in Sophie's eyes, and her lips slightly parted. For a brief moment, she bore no resemblance to Mia's younger sister. She had a feminine appearance. "All right," she whispered. Between us, there was a dense silence that was filled with unspoken words. This was risky. I also didn't give a damn. Mia went on her first date in the meantime. Trying to be discreet, she arrived home late, but I was already awake and seated on the couch when she entered. When she noticed me, she paused, her face unreadable. "You awaited the morning?" I gave a shrug. I couldn't sleep. After hesitating, she removed her heels. It was all right. I learned all I needed to know from it. "Yes?" I spoke in an informal tone. Mia groaned and rolled her shoulders, seemingly exhausted. "I'm not sure. Although he was attractive, he was simply conceited. He even consented to the date, as if he obviously felt I should be appreciative." Slowly, I nodded. She looked at me as if I might say anything to console her, to reassure her. I didn't. Rather, I got up, stretched, and moved past her in the direction of the bedroom. I said, "Good luck with the next one," behind my back. She didn't answer, but as I shut the door, I was certain that she had assumed this would be simple. She had anticipated victory. She was unaware that I was no longer merely playing defense. Now I was playing the game. I also needed to make my own movements. Mia had been trying to mask her annoyance for a week after their first date, even while she continued to go out a couple of times a week and claimed to be meeting new people. She was not returning home with the same arrogant assurance that she had when she originally proposed the open marriage. She seemed to be attempting to determine whether I was having as much difficulty as she was, as evidenced by the way she avoided discussing her nights out, and by the fact that she stayed with me a bit longer than usual. I wasn't, because I wasn't chasing strangers like she was. Sophie was mine. Initially, it began with basic texts. How are you doing? Has Mia told you about her most recent date? She has always been a bit conceited. Sophie then went one step further one evening. Hey, how about we have dinner? I paused. I convinced myself that sitting across from my wife's younger sister, drinking, laughing, and sensing the subtle pull of something neither of us was ready to identify was a horrible idea. Nevertheless, I consented. I wanted to explore where this would go, deep down. She chose a place that was quiet, with booths hidden away in the corners and dim lighting. When I got there, Sophie was already there, dressed in a simple black dress that somehow accentuated her curves in all the right ways. I sensed the tug when she looked up and grinned at me, her dark hair hanging loosely over her shoulders. Her voice was pleasant as she said, "Hey, hi." I was instantly acutely conscious of how intimate this felt as I slid into the seat across from her. After taking our drink orders, a waiter passed by and quietly disappeared. Leaning back and observing me, Sophie remarked, "So, how's the single life treating you?" as she dragged her straw through her drink. I grinned. "Am I really not single?" she taunted. Could have fooled me. I let out a breath. "Mia is struggling right now." Sophie chuckled softly. "Yes, I did figure it out. I guess she genuinely believed this would be simple." She did. Sophie shook her head and grinned. She was never truly grateful for what she had. I hesitated because of the way she phrased it. "What are you saying?" After a brief pause, she dropped her voice and leaned forward a little. "Let's be honest, Jake. Mia has always been self-centered. She believed she would prevail, thus, she desired an open marriage. She thought that while you waited at home, she would have guys queued up for her." I took a swallow. "And you don't believe that's taking place?" Something sharp sparked in her gaze. "I believe she is losing." The atmosphere between us shifted. I knew she felt the same way. That's where I could have stopped it. I could have changed the topic, laughed, or dismissed it. However, I didn't. Instead, I let my gaze linger on hers for a moment longer, gazing intently at the low-cut dress that flirted with a subtle dip. I paused to consider what it may have been like if Sophie hadn't been Mia's sister, if I hadn't been her husband, and if our paths had crossed in a different way. And I wasn't the only one who thought that, based on the way her breath caught. "Jake," she whispered. I waited, but she didn't finish, because the waiter came and put our drinks down before she could. Jokes, casual chat, and lingering looks took the place of the moment. Nevertheless, the stress persisted. Unspoken and waiting between us, it was there. She texted me later that evening. "Tonight was enjoyable. We ought to try it again." My heart pounded as I gazed at the message for a while. I finally typed back, "Yeah, we should," after that. Suddenly the game was different. Once more, Mia arrived home late. As she entered, I was sitting on the couch with a beer in my hand and one arm slackly slung over the backrest, watching the entrance. I saw the slight hunch in her shoulders as she attempted to appear casual by putting her purse on the counter and stroking her hair. It had not been a good date. She said, "Hey," without fully looking me in the eye. Smoothly, I took a sip of my drink and said, "Hey." She paused. Usually, she would give me subtle clues about her night to gauge my response and look for any indication of jealousy or unease. But nothing tonight. "I went out with that guy I told you about," she said, letting out a breath before finally taking a seat across from me. I arched an eyebrow. "The app-based one?" "Indeed." "Jason." She mustered a tiny smile that stopped short of her eyes. "He wasn't what I expected." Leaning forward, I pretended to be the worried spouse. "Oh?" Her laughter was dry. "Have you ever seen someone who appears stunning in photos but is completely blank in real life?" I grinned. "Every guy on Instagram, you mean?" She gave me a genuine laugh, but it didn't last long. She rubbed her temples and moaned. "I'm not sure. I expected him to be endearing. I'll give him credit for being attractive, but as soon as we sat down, he just... I'm not sure. He spent the entire time talking about himself." I gave a shrug. "It seems about right." She gave me a glance. I expected dating to be different. You assumed it would be simple, I corrected in a level voice. She pressed her lips together. I could see the realization sinking in and the cracks starting to develop. She made me envious since she thought she would be balancing men by now and enjoying the attention. Instead, she had to cope with men who weren't quite as interested in her as she had anticipated, as well as ghosting and conceit. What's the best part? She was unaware that her younger sister was texting me late at night while she was out there failing. Sophie didn't hesitate to get in touch. My phone buzzed that night after Mia had gone to bed. Mia hit out once more. I laughed to myself and then answered. She isn't as fond of being single as she initially believed. The dots showed up right away. Shocking. The enjoyment in her voice was nearly audible. She paused for a long moment before sending another message. Are you free tomorrow evening? I need some guidance on a certain matter. Suggestions? Correct. With my fingers hanging over the keyboard, I gazed at the screen. I was aware of this. I was aware of what it might become, and I was aware that I should refuse. Rather, I typed yes. Where? She responded right away. Come see me at Al's. 8 p.m. I ran a hand through my hair and let out a deep exhale. It was not a beneficial idea. An awful, perilous, and euphoric notion. Additionally, I was directly walking into it. Mia, meanwhile, was itching to win. The following day, I heard her pacing the kitchen while talking on the phone, her voice brimming with rage. No, I understand. She forced a giggle and said, You're busy, perhaps at a later date. A pause. Her grin dimmed. Indeed, yes, enjoy yours. After hanging up, she slammed her phone down on the counter and sighed in frustration. I watched, leaning against the doorway. Hard morning? Startled, she turned around. Jake, Jesus, don't surprise me. I didn't bother to cover my smirk when I said, didn't mean to. Another jerk? She clenched her jaw. He called it quits. He stated that a problem had arisen at work. That's unfortunate. I sipped my coffee, enjoying it more than I ought to have. You'll just have to keep trying, I suppose. Mia gave me a fierce look, but she remained silent. Rather, she snatched up her phone and hurried out of the kitchen, most likely in search of another match. She was having trouble. She felt irritated. She believed she could have it all, with me waiting at home while she considered her options. However, the game was not proceeding as she had anticipated. Furthermore, she was unaware that I was playing a completely different one. Because I was sitting across from Sophie at a dimly lit pub that night, watching her lick her wounds after yet another failed date, when she leaned in just too near, her fingers grazing my wrist as she giggled. It was meant to be me who was abandoned. Mia, however, was losing. She simply wasn't aware of it yet. Al's was a dimly lit establishment where patrons hid in booths out of sight. It wasn't the type of place you went on a date, at least not an official one. When I entered, Sophie was already seated at the far end of the bar, drinking something. Tonight, she had a different appearance, one that was more purposeful than her typical casual style. Her eyes stood out in a manner I hadn't noticed previously, thanks to a bit of mascara, dark pants that hugged her hips, and a fitting black blouse. She lifted her glass and grinned when she spotted me. Observe who truly arrived. I gestured to the bartender and slid onto the stool next to her. Whiskey. Nice. Then I turned to grin at her. I promised to. She tilted her head. Yes, but I didn't think you would follow through. Why is that? She gave a shrug. You're a decent man. You don't seem like a game player to me. Her statement filled me with nausea. Perhaps I'm learning. She didn't force the small curvature of her lips. Rather, she raised her glass and sipped slowly before continuing. Will you ever ask me what I need advice on then? I laughed. I'll bite. All right. What's so crucial that you required my professional advice? Before responding, Sophie watched the liquid flow as she swirled her drink in her glass. At last she said, Dating. I thought you could give me some advice since you're officially single now. I arched an eyebrow. Do you require dating assistance? She grinned. All right, it might not help. However, I'm not sure. You're a man. I assumed you would have knowledge. We seemed to be chatting in circles while we waited for the actual conversation to begin, which was strange. I sipped my drink while leaning back. Are you dating anyone? Sophie paused. Not at all. However, I'd like to be. She let out a sigh and put down her drink. Jake, I'm not sure what I want. I felt a steady surge of heat as she uttered my name. I ought to have put an end to this. I should have reminded myself of her identity and established a boundary. However, I didn't. Rather, I allowed the quiet to linger between us, laden with an unsaid presence. Sophie broke it at last. "Do you ever believe that Mia erred?" I scowled. "What are you saying?" Her black eyes searched mine as she fully turned to face me. "When she requested this, do you believe she truly knew what she was doing?" I sneered. "No, she believed that men would be lining up to worship her." Sophie grinned. "Indeed, Mia sounds like that." She was now close enough for me to smell her perfume, which was light and sweet and entirely different from Mia's typical pricey, overbearing scent. Sophie hesitated, biting her lip. Then she said, "What if she loses you?" in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper. Something broke. I didn't consider it. I didn't pause to think about the repercussions. I simply made a grab for her. As my hand touched her cheek and my fingers moved down to her jawline, Sophie took a short breath. She didn't back off. She leaned toward my touch, if anything. I then gave her a kiss. It wasn't prearranged. It lacked caution. It was impetuous and desperate, a flurry of feelings I hadn't even had time to properly understand. For a minute, nothing else was there as her lips parted beneath mine, warm and tender. No, Mia. There was no open marriage. There were no lines that we were at risk of crossing. Only Sophie. However, she withdrew, her breath weak. Her fingers pressed to her lips, as if she was still in shock over what had just transpired. "Jake," she said softly. All around us, reality smashed in. I tightened my teeth and let out a harsh exhale while running a hand through my hair. Sophie's expression was unreadable as she swallowed hard. We ought not to have done that. However, her voice lacked conviction. Though every part of me was still yelling for more, I nodded. "I understand." After a prolonged pause, she reached for her suitcase. I ought to leave. My heart continued to pound as I watched her leave the pub. I should have regretted it. However, I didn't. And the true issue was that the kiss with Sophie was a mistake, I told myself. I vowed not to let it happen again. However, when the truth becomes too alluring to ignore, lies have a curious way of coming undone. After that evening at Al's, Sophie and I didn't talk for 3 days. Don't text. Avoid making any phone calls. Nothing. However, her absence weighed heavily on me. Mia, on the other hand, was unaware of it since she was too preoccupied with attempting to save her botched open marriage attempt. She left the house every night in search of excitement and approval, and each night she returned home with a more dejected appearance than the one before. She didn't know that I was standing here, being seen by someone else, while she was out hunting ghosts, being desired by another person. It was Sophie who broke first. She texted me on the 4th day. "I'm thinking about it all the time. I couldn't either, but I took a while to reply. I stared at the words, my heart racing, and let the message lie there. I could stop it now, draw the line before it got out of hand. However, I didn't. I texted back, me either, instead. The dots were there in an instant. Can we have a conversation? Speak? Correct. We didn't want to do that, and I knew it very well. We got together at her house. Sophie's roommate was conveniently out of town, so Mia assumed I was out with friends. I knew we had passed the point of no return as soon as I walked through the door. With her arms folded as if to contain herself, Sophie stood in the living room, biting her lip. But I could tell everything from her gaze. She was as desperate for this as I was. The tension in the air between us crackled as I shut the door behind me. "This is incorrect," Sophie whispered. I gave a nod. I understand. Breathing shallowly, she stepped forward slowly. "So why have you come here?" I had nothing to say, or perhaps I did. She noticed me, which is why I was here, because she gave me a feeling that Mia hadn't experienced in a long time, because I couldn't bring myself to care about the repercussions when she gave me that look, as if I were the only man in the world. Sophie gulped forcefully and grabbed for me, her fingers shaking. I managed to reach her halfway. All of the hesitation and shame vanished the moment our lips met. This was not cautious. This was not a deliberate action. Years of neglect, collapsing into a single moment of reckless desperation, was a raw and desperate situation. My fingers gripped her waist, drawing her flush against me as her hands were in my hair. Her breath caught as she slumped beneath me. and I pushed her back against the couch. With her fingernails biting into my shoulders, she gasped, "Jake?" I let out a groan as my mouth moved down her neck, caressing her warm, velvety flesh. Mia was not on my mind. I didn't consider the impact this would have on her, because Mia was only a dim recollection at that very moment, and everything revolved around Sophie. But it didn't end there. That night, something ignited between us that none of us could quench. We shared hotel room secrets and treasured moments. Nighttime drives that lead nowhere. She would wrap up to me on quiet mornings, muttering things I never imagined I'd hear again, and creating invisible patterns on my chest. She once threaded her fingers through mine and said, "Jake, you deserve love." And I believed it for the first time in a long time. Mia was still in the dark. She believed she was in charge. This, she believed, was her game. However, she was unaware that I had previously discovered something better while she was looking for it. Furthermore, that wasn't her. Mia had always been self-assured, almost arrogant. She had undoubtedly thought that she would be the one succeeding while I failed when she proposed the open marriage. However, she wasn't doing well. I wasn't floundering either. I was winning. She simply wasn't aware of it yet. She was initially too preoccupied with her own shortcomings to realize anything had changed. She tried to make something work that just didn't work, and she was tired and frustrated. Slowly, though, she began to notice things. I appeared lighter. The fact that I stopped reacting when she casually brought up her dates. How I started carrying my phone everywhere all of a sudden. Initially, it was only brief hesitations, a quick glance. As I passed her holding my phone, she seemed to be considering whether or not to ask me a question, as evidenced by the silence that followed. However, she eventually spoke it aloud one evening. "You look different." I raised an eyebrow as I looked up from my book. "In a different way?" She paused. "I'm not sure. In a nutshell, it's something new. Perhaps happier." I gave a shrug. "Perhaps I am." I noticed doubt for the first time in weeks when her lips parted slightly. She believed she understood me. She believed she knew what would happen. But she was doubting herself for the first time, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Sophie and I used caution. When Mia was around, we didn't text as much. We met in locations where we wouldn't encounter familiar faces. But secrets have a way of coming to light, no matter how cautious you are. Mia's calls to Sophie went unanswered, which was the first sign. Then the justifications. "I have been quite busy. It's been crazy at work. One swear we'll catch up soon." Mia had never questioned her sister before, but eventually, I could see that she was thinking about it. After supper one evening, she put down her fork and gave me a close inspection. "Have you recently spoken with Sophie?" I didn't blink. "Not at all. Why?" "She's been strange. Ignoring my calls. People are canceling their plans. I'm not sure. She is not like this." I took a sip of my beer and shrugged. Perhaps she's dealing with something. Perhaps. She didn't appear persuaded, though. I forced myself not to snicker. Sophie texted me one evening after Mia had gone to bed. She seemed suspicious, heart racing. I gazed at the screen. A second message followed. "We must exercise greater caution." With a deep exhale, I tightened my hold on my phone. She was correct. Now Mia was observing. When would she ultimately realize the truth, she wondered. Mia wasn't a moron. She had been trying for weeks to ignore the uneasy sensation in her stomach that something wasn't quite right. She wanted to think she was still in charge and that I was waiting for her at home while she adjusted to her new life. However, she had lost control. She was going to discover the full extent of her defeat. It took place on a Tuesday evening. The distinct sound of my phone buzzing on the bathroom counter reached me while I was taking a shower. I initially disregarded it, allowing the steam to envelop me while I washed. Then Mia's voice reached my ears. "Who is Sophie?" The entire universe screeched to a stop. With my heart pounding, I turned off the water. I locked my phone. Mia was standing there with my phone in both hands when I grabbed a towel and went outside. Her face appeared pallid, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Her eyes, however, were what struck me the most. The truth had finally come to her. I swallowed, trying to speak as steadily as possible. "Mia," she raised the phone. "My sister has been receiving texts from you." I let out a breath and combed over my damp hair. "I can explain, Mia." "What can you explain?" Although her tone was uncannily serene, I could sense the storm building behind it. "That you have been secretly hanging out with my sister?" With a harsh clang, she crossed her arms and tossed the phone onto the counter. Jake, please provide the truth. For what duration has this been occurring? There was no point in lying now. I looked her in the eye and spoke quietly. Sometime. She shook her head and laughed bitterly. Jake, Jesus. You did it, really. I remained silent. She looked aside, clutching the sink's edge as if she needed a handhold. I sensed something wasn't right. I was aware of her strange behavior. However, I never considered. She came to a halt, breathing heavily as her shoulders rose and fell. She gently turned back to me after that, and her voice was hushed when she spoke again. Have you shared a bed with her? I paused. She tightened her jaw. Jake, you have no right to lie to me. My chest constricted as I let out a breath. Yes. She flinched. She stared at me for a long time without saying anything, as if she was trying to take in the rubble of all she had created. Then she laughed sharply and broke. I believed that I should be the one to win this, she muttered. I swallowed the lump in my throat. You shoved me away, Mia. This is what you wanted. Her eyes blazed as she snapped her head up. Jake, I wanted freedom. This was not what I wanted. I didn't wish to. Her voice broke as she stopped. I didn't answer since we both knew the truth in our hearts. She had thought she would prevail. She had anticipated my abandonment. The idea that I might find someone else had never even crossed her mind. That I could locate her sibling. Mia steadied herself against the counter, her hands shaking. It appeared as though she could be ill. Then she whispered the one question I knew she would ask. Are you in love with her? Quiet. My life's longest and heaviest silence. I had the option to lie. I could have avoided giving her the last blow. Instead, I maintained eye contact with her and spoke the only truth I knew. I'm not sure. Mia drew in a sharp breath, as though I had struck her. Slowly nodding, she took a step back, as if she needed to give us some distance. Whoa. With fatigue pressing against my bones, I wiped a hand down my face. Mia, don't. She extended a hand. Just don't. Now her eyes were slick with unshed tears and crimson. She wouldn't let them go, though. She forced herself to preserve her composure as she raised her chin. She then uttered the words that altered everything with a chilly, hollow laugh. Jake, you know what? You're correct. I scowled. What? You're right, she said again, her tone more steady. Yes, I pushed you away. Additionally, I erred. However, she shook her head and exhaled sharply. You shared a bed with my sister. I didn't answer. Nothing could be said. Her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile as she wiped her face. Hopefully, she was worthwhile. She pivoted on her heel and left after saying that. After she left, I stood there for a while, gazing at my image in the mirror. Mia was defeated. I didn't feel like I had won, though, for some reason. That evening, Mia did not return home. I didn't inquire, and to be honest, I had no idea where she went. I was almost expecting her to shout, toss things, demand answers, and demand me as she stormed back through the door. However, she didn't. Rather, she disappeared, and the home felt too quiet for the first time since it all began. Not calm, not liberating. Simply empty. I didn't get much sleep. Her face and the way her breath caught, when I confessed that I had slept with Sophie, kept playing back in my head. When she had asked me if I loved her, her hands had shaken, and my response, I'm not sure, since I was unaware. However, I knew I had to see Sophie. Not because Mia is alone. Not only because of the consequences. If we were genuine, I had to know. I gave Sophie a call the following day. On the first ring, she responded. Jake, she said in a quiet, unsure tone, as if she already knew. I answered. She found out. Sophie breathed out slowly. I assumed. Did she notice the messages? Yes. A pause. After a while, she muttered, Are you all right? I was surprised at that question. Was I all right? I wasn't certain. I wasn't devastated. Guilt wasn't consuming me. However, I was something. Something substantial. Something agitated. I'm not sure, I said. Sophie paused. At last, she said, Come over, and I did. Sophie was waiting at the door of her flat when I arrived. She wore an enormous sweater that hung just low enough to reveal her thighs curve, and she was barefoot. She appeared to have spent the entire morning raking her hands through her loose, slightly disheveled hair. She appeared apprehensive. She opened the door to let me in and shut it behind me. We were silent for a time. Then she let out a sigh. What happens now, Jake? I exhaled softly and ran a palm down my face. I'm not sure. Was there anything else she said? I gave a head shake. She simply departed. Sophie nodded and bit her lip. She went over to the couch and sat down, pulling her knees up and putting her arms about them. I sat next to her, not touching her but close enough to sense her warmth. We sat for a long time in quiet. Sophie finally said something. You are aware that she will never pardon any of us? I laughed without humor. Indeed, I assumed. Sophie's dark eyes searched mine as she turned to face me completely. Then she spoke, and her words struck me more strongly than anything Mia had spoken. Jake, I don't regret it. I took a deep breath. Sophie's knuckles were white as her fingers curled around the sweater's edge. I know. I am aware that this is crazy. However, I don't regret it. I didn't either, so my chest constricted. She took a swallow. Jake, I've wanted you for years. I've spent more time than I should have. She shook her head and let out a weak laugh. And I couldn't help myself when Mia opened that door and made you available. Since I knew, I kept quiet. I had also sensed it. The look in her eyes confirmed it. She had a unique way of listening to others. Long before Mia realized she was losing me, she had always been there. Sophie had noticed me. Sophie's voice was little more than a whisper as she gazed down. You are not required to pick me. You are not required to take any action. I grabbed her hand. As I interlaced my fingers with hers, she inhaled deeply. Sophie, I whispered. She raised her head, and suddenly I was aware I had made a decision. Furthermore, Mia wasn't the one. Mia had never been involved. Mia never returned home. She did not return home that evening, nor did she return the next evening. She still hadn't come back after a week. A common buddy informed me that she was lodging at a hotel in the heart of the city. She apparently expressed her need for space to others. However, I was aware of the reality. She would not return, not to me, not to us. To be completely honest, I didn't want her to. Mia was licking her wounds while I was with Sophie. We came out of hiding. We stopped acting like it was real, but we didn't tell anyone. Mia undoubtedly opened the door for me as well, if she had done so for herself. I went straight through it. It wasn't with Mia when the inevitable confrontation ultimately arose. She was with her parents. Robert, her father, called out to me first. I could hear the seething wrath beneath his tight, controlled voice. You should visit, he added. Is Mia present? I inquired. Come on over here. The line died. I nearly skipped it. I nearly concluded that it was no longer my issue. However, I had a feeling that this was more than simply Mia. Sophie was also involved in this. So I went. Her mother hardly gave me a glance when I got to Mia's parents' house. She appeared unable to accept my presence as she sat on the couch with her arms folded and gazed out the window. There was no sign of Mia. Robert, however, was waiting. His face was grim as he shut the door behind me as soon as I entered. Jake, you really messed up. I leaned forward and let out a breath. I understand, he sneered. Do you? As I don't believe you do. I said nothing. He shook his head and ran a palm down his face. Look, I'm not going to act like Mia was flawless. She might be self-centered. She has always thought about the world in a particular manner. It was so understated that I nearly laughed. He went on, but you married her, Jake. You promised her something. I tightened my jaw. It was she who desired an open marriage. And it was you who... His jaw tensed as he halted. Then he nodded, which surprised me. So you'd better not mess this up either. I blinked. What? Robert rubbed his temples and moaned. Mia has had enough of you. That much is clear. However, Sophie is different from her sister. She has feelings, really. She's not merely searching for the newest and greatest thing. You had better be very certain that you will be with her. As I gulped, my chest constricted. Since I was certain, I was more certain than ever before. I stood and looked him in the eye. Yes, I am. Robert looked at me for a while. Finally, he gave a nod, then leave. The consequences were severe. Mia wouldn't talk to Sophie. Their parents made fruitless attempts to patch things up. The damage was already done. Some choose a side. Others agreed that we now had to make this decision. I didn't care either way, since Sophie was mine. Furthermore, I refused to let her leave. I reflected on everything that had brought me to this point months later, as I lay in bed with Sophie curled up next to me. her breath warm against my skin. The marriage was open, the treachery, the options. And I came to a realization. Mia had believed she was releasing herself. However, I was ultimately the one who had been released. And I felt more alive than ever before.